So welcome. This is our second session on the early Greek thinking. We're talking about the Heraclitus Logos fragment. This is this book, Heidegger, Early Greek Thinking. We have only like about 20 pages of reading this time, a little bit less, on this Heraclitus fragment called the Logos fragment. And we'll get people's first impressions, etc. We already know one of Joe's, which is help with the Greek. So why is this is Greek to him? I want to mention at least a few other things you could look at besides this. There's going to be a third Heraclitus at the end. There are collections of the PreSocratic fragments, and you can find all the Heraclitus fragments translated, etc., online in various places. I don't think you need pointers for those sorts of things, but some other things which I think are useful that I will point to, including Eva Braun, who I think we read once in another meeting. I think Craig probably remembers that one, who I think is a really good secondary source on Heraclitus. And then there's a few other things, but we'll get to that. That's just other things to read maybe before the third time. When we get to the second Heraclitus fragment, we want to sell up on Heraclitus more broadly than this fragment, maybe. The other thing is for next time, we're going to be reading the Moira fragment, the Parmenides fragment. For that, I mentioned last time that that I wish that Heidegger gives a detailed discussion of the three ways in Parmenides, and he does give us a discussion of three ways in Parmenides. Pete pointed this out. It occurs in Introduction to Metaphysics. It's only about 5 pages long, so we're going to try to get you a. So it's not as detailed as I would like, but it is there, and so I want to distribute that as an additional reading for next time. So besides the fragment from this book, this is an earlier discussion, but where he mentions the three ways of Parmenides. The three ways of Parmenides are the path of being, which he calls the divine path, path of the altogether not, which he doesn't assign anything else, and the way of mortals, or the way of opinion, as the middle way, the way of doxa. But those are the three paths that we're talking about. We'll get to that for next time, but the point of this is that for next time, we're going to add something to the reading besides this of about 6 pages from that other book, and Pete and I are working on getting a version of that distributed to electronically, so no one has to go out and buy this book if they don't already have it. Okay, so anyway, that's just some admin stuff. We'll talk later about the when we're planning to do the next time, but roughly I'm thinking in 4 weeks would be better for me. That would be the 12th of March. So if people have comments as we go around or whether the 12th of March works for them, you can mention it. But the idea would be to read for the 12th of March, just the next section on Parmenides and the additional 6 pages or so from Introduction to Metaphysics about the three ways, because we want to get a little bit broader view of Parmenides. And then we have one final session where we both read the last section on Heraclitus and also sum up. So yeah, that's the current plan. If people want to accelerate, because I realize this is a very short reading for this time, if you want to accelerate and do the last all of it, all the remainder of the book in one session instead of 2, let me know that too. When you go around for comments. All right, Pete, do you want to start us off with, or am I interrupting you because you're working on something?
So I don't have that much to say. So I was glad to get the extra time to go reread it. And I think I mentioned on a comment, the last year I was in a reading group that did the Heraclitus book, which has 2 lecture courses. And there I noticed the Heidegger refers to little lambda logos differently from capital lambda logos. And you know, he was more explicit in those lectures, more expansive. So I was sensitive to that while I was reading this. And I think, like we said last time with the Anaximander, he's really stretching the translation to get in what he wants. And I think the capital lambda logos, it's really a stretch, but that's, what he wants to talk about. And in the end, he's going to talk about, his interpretation of being. And in this case, he's concerned with language and the logos. And so he's going to make his, typical distinctions like between ontic and ontologic and so forth, but just in the context of the word logos. So, as I see it, there's capital L logos, which stands for the clearing and Erasmus. There's little L logos, which stands for the ontic and language in general. Language is a symbolic means of communication. And in between, there's the legain, where he calls the gathering, and that's when we take, let's say, what's before us as something. So another way of saying gathering a new thing is to place that thing within the context of the referential totality with which we're, the individual Dasein's dealing with, making sense of their world.
Can I make one quick comment there? So the distinctions are useful, but you mentioned especially gathering as an individual Dasein making sense, but the sense making, if it becomes a saying, is not simply individual Dasein. The saying is a shared thing in the common world. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the languages are part of our shared understanding.
Right, and one of the reasons I bring this up is that one of the features, not just in Heidegger but in Heraclitus, is he has this separate notion of the common and what it means to have awareness of the common, as well as to have awareness of the logos. And some of that even ties into things we saw back in the Theaetetus, which is a slightly different understanding of the common. But understanding how each of these thinkers thinks about the common, as Heraclitus uses it, I think is helpful here. Heraclitus in particular is particularly critical of the, let's look at it this way, the understanding of the world that people have when they treat intellect as something private to themselves, right? That's something you find recurring in multiple sayings of Heraclitus, that people have a common world, but most reason as though they had a private opinion. And then he talks about people who seem to experience the world as separated when awake as they do when they are asleep, something like that. But he's contrasting all this to awareness of the common, and I think this will come out especially in the fourth essay in this book rather than this one. But I think it's already there in the background of this logos that is being listened to. But sorry, I wanted this interjection because of the point about private, but go ahead.
No, that was it for me, but that's interesting. So is there a connection between Heraclitus using the common and Heidegger's use of the they in terms of inauthenticity?
I don't think so. I think the accent is almost reversed. I mean, for Heraclitus, the common world is something like the publicly disclosed, appearing to all truth, and the private opinions that people have of it are almost attempted secessions from that common world. It's as though people are retreating into separated shells from a world that they share. There is an element of the they construct in Being in Time, which is about the always already being with others, and that the they is a kind of inauthentic reaction to that. I think the part that Heraclitus is getting on is that always already with others aspect. But for Heraclitus, this is also directly related to how he thinks about truth. He talks in the fourth essay, which we'll get to. One of the issues is how can they hide from that which never sets? The thing which never sets is something like being, but it's also the common. And hiding from it is something that minds somehow manage to do, and in a way that is curious to Heraclitus. But again, we'll get to that in the fourth. But I think it's fair to say that the status of language is very much in play here, and the decision or choice to translate logos back to meanings which are prior to its meaning as saying. I won't say speech or reason, but saying, in things like gathering and laying, that Heidegger goes into here. There is a sense to that. He is bringing out something extra which is there in the word that a non-Greek might not hear, or even a modern Greek might not hear. But I think Heraclitus is always listening to multiple intonations of words and using the fact that they can be read in different ways to freight short phrases with lots of meaning. And whatever else he may mean by logos, he also means saying, as the publicly declared speech of the sayer. And that's part of his own, that is Heraclitus's philosophy of language, in my opinion, as a way in which the common appears. So anyway, the point is, we have to be aware of having Heidegger's understanding of language be read back into Heraclitus, who may have had a different understanding of language. They may agree on that. They may both see things in the nature of language that we should, pay attention to, separately or in agreement with one another. But we should at least leave open the possibility that Heraclitus has his own understanding of the role of something like saying as a cement of the common or something like that, which is part of his own, that is Heraclitus's, I would say, theory of language, doctrine of language, understanding of language. They're not theories, really. They're just understandings. But okay, if you wanted to give, Joe in particular has a question, but I wanted to first give Pete a question, if I could. If you wanted to give Pete a one-sentence version of capital L logos as the clearing, what would you say that is? Because I think the small L logos as something like semantic meaning, because it's so familiar in the modern time, we get. But not everyone who hasn't read all of Heidegger gets what you would mean to say that capital L logos is one of the names, with a capital N, one of the names of the clearing or something like that.
Right, and it's so the capital L logos is where or to use Heidegger's Kantian language in other places, it's the condition for the possibility of understanding.
Yes, but you have to explain why something that is a condition for the possibility of understanding would have a name like logos.
That's where I think he really stretches it to and then specifically in this fragment, it revolves around the en Panta. The one is everything.
Yes, we'll get to the en Panta. That's definitely a critical part of this. I think that Heidegger is right to see that Heraclitus is talking about something like en Panta here, and I think it's fine on his part to connect that to the just general project of Greek metaphysics, something like that, and to say that because this is part of the general project of Greek metaphysics, something like the nature of being, or something like the nature of the whole, or something like the nature of the all, or something like the nature of the one is, being enunciated here. A version of it is coming to language here, right? All of those would even be reasons for Heraclitus to use logos as a, if I can put it this way, a peak meaning word for some of those things. The question is, does it for Heidegger, and is it the same meaning? Is he just trying to read that read Heraclitus that way because he's trying to understand how Heraclitus is using the term, or is he adopting that usage as his own? That's the question I'm raising.
So somewhere he says the PreSocratics never thematized the clearing, and so I would say that Heidegger doesn't think Heraclitus is referring to the clearing as such. That's an interpretation in Heidegger's.
Yeah, he does say on page 77 that the Greeks experience saying in this way, but Heraclitus included, they never think the essence of language expressly as the logos, capital L, as the laying that gathers. The claim there is not that something isn't thought of in the word logos, but that it is not explicitly thought of as the essence of language.
Right. So to Heidegger, the PreSocratics they're in the clearing. They're I don't know, sensitive to the clearing, but they never explicitly refer to it.
Right. They don't name it that way. They name it other things. I got it. Yeah.
And and Heidegger's going there because then he's going to say Plato and Aristotle close off that meaning with metaphysics, and just something to throw in there. So we've been discussing this earlier. Heidegger being ungenerous to Plato and ascribing the metaphysics to Plato, whereas Plato is actually more open and there's more things in play in the dialogues. And it's really Aristotle that cements in the constant presence of things as metaphysics, let's say. But I was reading some stuff about Pythagoras, and I get the sense that it's actually Pythagoras that starts the ball rolling towards metaphysics, and then Plato picks this up, because it's Pythagoras who introduces the immortal soul into Greek thinking. And then once you have immortality, then you have permanent presence. So I just thought I'd throw that.
There's definitely a Pythagorean connection. I don't think it's just that one. That quote, introduction, unquote, is usually ascribed not simply to Pythagoras, but to Pythagoras trying to rationally understand things that he sees in the mystery, the more popular mystery religions, right? But Pythagoras is also I can put it this way, an early technizer, right? Making of these things into a techne, is what I'm trying to say. Heraclitus has a particularly dim view of Pythagoras as a polymath who tries to substitute cleverness for depth, something like that. Which may be a sentiment that Heidegger would share with him. I want to come back to all these issues of charity or lack thereof, how much Heraclitus sees, how much of the things which Heraclitus did see remain closed off or spread beyond him. I think those are very much open questions here. My own take, which we'll get to, but is that Heidegger is correctly bringing out here and in the fourth essay some of the things that Heraclitus did see. And all credit to Heidegger for recovering that much of things that Heraclitus did see. He has not convinced me that those things were brief flashes, temporary and lost. I think they have more of an afterlife and tradition than Heidegger is letting on here. But that's my own condition. Some of it can't even be proved from these texts. Some of it has to go outside to much later things. But in any event, good first reaction. Joe, you were trying to raise your hand first. Do you want to do that, or do you want to go on to your first reactions?
Well, the hand raising question had to do with to what extent the label, it's a modern label, semantics, applies to this very close examination of how these gentlemen are using these words and what the meanings of the words are. because I certainly relish and enjoy what's going on here. But I was wondering, semantics is a label. I'm not sure if it was ever mentioned in any of these writings, but it's mentioned in other things that I read about that seem to be talking about something similar. As an aside, I'm reading Popper's book on the side, so he's obviously got
Sure.
a different view. But the point is that I'm just bringing these in. It piques my
Sure.
curiosity.
The closest that comes to that to being thematized here is there's when Heidegger contrasts the sense of language as something like the saying that lays what is before people, something like that for intuitive seeing. He contrasts that with the idea of understanding language as meaningful utterance, as phonemes, that is sounds with meanings, with semantics, right? Meaningful utterance is a kind of only moderately later Greek technical understanding of language, where you say language is a system of auditory signs that signify, something like that. And
fundamentally, it's communication. They're probably trying to focus. If it's the laying, then it has to be two minds both focused on it. Two minds.
It's not simply the minds that are in communication in the Heideggerian understanding of the original thing. The universe is first in contact with the mind, and the medium by which the minds are in communication is that they are also both in communion with the same universe, right? So that's different from the understanding of communication as expression. The communication understood as expression, as phonemes with semantics that he contrasts here, does view language as being fundamentally about communication, as there are things which are inside separate heads, and some means has to be found for transmitting them from one head to another, as though thought is first subjective, and then there is a bizarrely unexplained required intermediate step whereby some exterior symbols, a sequence of symbols or sounds, has to be used to translate between one another, because these disembodied minds for some reasons cannot communicate with one another telepathically, but have to vibrate air in order to talk to each other. And the reason why these separate minds would have to talk to each other by vibrating air is not previously explained. Now, the reality is it's because they're embodied finite intelligences, right? Entirely plugged into the world, right? And they were never abstract separated entities to begin with, right? So that notion of understanding language as a purely technical thing of phonemes that signify, Heidegger is holding out as the later technical Greek understanding that he thinks misses something that's going on in language directly related to intuitive understanding, something like that. And he thinks that that is part of what the fragment in front of us is about when Heraclitus starts it off with the strong "not to me," right? Don't listen to me, listen to the saying, listen to the account. That contrast, not to me, but to the logos, is trying to distinguish between the merely enunciated word that might be an expression of the private thoughts in the mind of Heraclitus and the truth of the account that you could verify for yourself by examining the world that the account is about instead of the speech of the man in front of you, right? Heraclitus is trying to say, don't pay any attention to me, the speaker. The communication I'm talking about is not coming from me. I'm only a sounding board it passed through, right? The communication is coming to you from the nature of things, and that's where to look to verify it, right? So to make that kind of distinction is, from Heidegger's point of view, a key part of the beginning of the passage, why he starts with that not me, but construction. And that is designed to make a distinction between some earlier sense of what language means, some other more directly intuitive sense of what language is about or is for, from its semantic communication with phonemes, right, as expression. But this is taking us later into the essay, but it's a great question. I want to switch gears to your first reactions / questions.
First reaction was, as I earlier said, the confusion, since I didn't have a Greek reference book for every time he tossed in
Yes.
and so you're helping very much with that. That's the reason I tuned in today, in fact, is to learn what I ought to have just read, although I did just read it more or less.
Yes, but it was in a foreign language, so to speak.
It's in a foreign language it's Greek to me, as the joke was.
Yes.
Thank you very much, and I'll pass now.
Okay. Jim, you want to give us first reactions? First of all, did you manage to get this reading done in time and all that kind of stuff?
Yep. It was definitely fun and interesting. Very thought-provoking, and I mean, honestly, I wasn't as engaged as you all were in the beginning of the reading, so I don't want to. I have a lot of questions, but I don't want to. It's unfair for me to start loading with that now because a lot of what I might be asking may have been already covered, even though I did watch the other.
Okay. Well, we can definitely come back to questions later, but any other first reactions?
My reactions are, I'm in a constant state of pause because I have legitimate questions about why they're focusing on logos and is his emphasis on to say or a saying, but Plato used rhema, and so did Aristotle, as the speaking or saying of a word, not the logos, and that Plato was using the logos in form of a proposition that you think. So when Heidegger says Heraclitus, when Heidegger says that Heraclitus says that logos is to say, and that part of his foundation for his whole thing that he creates, I'm still like, well, I'm not sure that.
So to be clear, he's not actually starting by saying that it's saying. He's starting by saying the common sense here would be to understand this as speech or saying, but Heidegger thinks it actually means more like the laying that gathers.
Right.
Right. So the laying that gathers is his gloss on logos, but then he has to explain why it's also directly related to accusantes, hearing, and other things which we'll get also related to logos later. But I think the explanation of that is simple enough. Heraclitus, as usual, means both. Right? He's not stuck with only a single word. He's not stuck with only a single word meaning, and he likes to say things where the rays that come out from each word connect to all the other words in a multi-threaded way rather than a single-threaded way, so that by reading each thread each way, you can get 6 different sentences out of one sentence. And which one does he mean? Yes, he means all of them, right?
Yeah. I don't know enough about the etymology of rhema to know like if it precluded.
Sure. I mean, we shouldn't try substituting other words here. We should just try to understand the multiple meanings of the word that is actually chosen. Now, there are places where Heidegger will translate these words with a particular concept, and you have to ask, wait a minute, does Heraclitus ever refer to that other concept? Is that the word for that other concept? I mean, my favorite example here is sofon, which means the wise, is is interpreted by Heidegger here as the faithful. And that's not the ordinary word for faithful. I mean, I think you can see why he says it, and he has his own whole thing he's trying to bring out, that's one of the things that Heraclitus is saying in reading it that way. But I think we can I don't know if we can learn more. We can learn something else by leaving it as wise. That I think Heraclitus also means, and maybe even means more, but we'll come back to that, because there's definitely other aphorisms of Heraclitus where he refers specifically to the wise. The wise is a term of art in Heraclitus, and it has a very strong, important to him meaning, and it is not obvious that meaning is faithful. But my point is that instead of taking a word that's translated and looking at, what's the other word for that, sometimes that can be legitimate if you're trying to see whether or not a given reading coming from Heidegger is forced. But if it's a matter of, why did Heraclitus choose this word instead of that word? He chose the words he chose. He probably had reasons. We have to see the meanings that he packed into the words that he chose. We can imagine him using a different word for it and see that if that would have limited or sculpted them. But here's the thing to not do with Heraclitus. And you can often do this with other people. And so it's a rule of reading that we often adopt. We think, if this word is here, I can use that word or the intonations, that inflections of that word to cut away a whole forest of other meanings, to leave only one meaning that the whole sentence together has to mean, right? I can use all the context to parse down to a smaller set of outcomes where there's only one thing that this collection of words can mean. And by making the thing go unique, I make it clearer and more comprehensible, right? Heraclitus almost never is trying to do that. He's almost never trying to have only one meaning in the words. And that's just obvious if you read all of his fragments, preserved fragments, instead of just one of them. They're always of this compressed oracular form, and he'll even tell you in some of the aphorisms why he does that, right? He says the oracle that is at Delphi, neither affirms nor denies, but gives a sign, right? The oracular utterance has multiple meanings into it, and the different meanings read into it are part of the point. It's saying something that way. But okay, other first reactions, or you're on mute, Jim.
You were asking other people for their first reactions.
Oh, sorry. I was
No.
asking if you had any other. Okay.
No, it's fascinating and it's great. Thank you for that.
Sure.
I still admittedly I really am like trying to be a fan of Plato. So I think part of my sticking point with that was, Plato uses it this way later, and maybe I can weaken Heidegger's. I know.
Let's not try to talk about Plato.
Yeah. I'm admitting that was a bias of mine.
I got
I'm
it.
trying to protect Plato. So
I got it. Yeah. Don't worry about it. Plato can take care of himself, as I say.
Yeah. So it was. I loved all of it. I really am intrigued to hear what you guys say about hearing and hearkening, how that works into all of it. But I guess I should hearken now and wait and see what y'all think.
Okay.
And I don't mean it like y'all. I don't know why I'm saying it like that. I'm not Southern, but I'd like to see what you all think. So that's the most I can give for my impression until I hear more.
Okay. So Craig, first impressions on the Heraclitus logos fragment.
I did get through reading it again. I basically just used the various Greek words as placeholders without trying to go back to the lexicon to say, what does the lexicon say that they mean, which could be a third meaning alongside Heraclitus, alongside Heidegger. Decided that was worthless. I just needed to use them as placeholders to try to figure out what Heidegger was saying. And that was a little easier to deal with than trying to put other stuff into it. On the other hand, the homework I gave to myself is to go back and re-examine the prologue of the Gospel of John and the use of logos there in light of what we learned out of this unpacking of the fragment that we have here. So that was kind of interesting. I also tried to read the post that Pete put up from Richardson and ran into a definite frustration with that because he uses two letters to refer to texts in his references. So EM, SZ, VA, I have no freaking clue what he is referring to.
Yes. There's a key at the front of his book that will tell you which one of Heidegger's German works that refers to. But without that key, it's even more incomprehensible than untranslated Greek to Joe.
Yeah. So that
because it's code at that point.
Yeah, that was the basic code. The code words that were there, the two-letter codes that were there, didn't mean anything, and not having had the other book, that made it very frustrating. So
just a tip: if you're on the desktop, not on your mobile, if you hover over the two-letter acronyms, it tells you what the German was.
Okay, I'll have to go back and do that on the original because I ended up printing it out so I could read it and write on it. And
there you go.
You lost the tooltips. There you go.
Writing on my screen is kind of a pain. So that's.
I love that we're having technical problems with our computer translation of code word encodings of this, discussion about how the nature of language isn't just phonemes to semantically refer.
There's a subtlety to that that shouldn't go unnoticed in terms of a lot of things I'm working on. Everybody talks about all these things about information that I've been doing a lot of other reading on lately, and it's kind of like, yeah, there's a lot of information encoded in a CD, but if you don't know the Red Book and you don't have a CD player that knows what the encoding of the Red Book standard is, it's gibberish. And so the connectedness of that, I think, is kind of still a theme that has to come into this in what is it that you're exactly gathering together at this point, and how is it that it gets gathered, and what are the underlying things that help make it be gathered. So there's something in there that I found kind of fascinating. But at this point, I made it through it a couple times. I still think there was an interesting. He doesn't quite get into the multiple structures being sort of a foundation for poetry and theater, but it's almost hinted at a couple times, and I found that still also fascinating too. So that's my take on it for right now. So we'll see where it goes from there.
He does mention that if I may, at least one connection to theater in this one, where before he goes off on the PreSocratics understanding, he also gives examples out of Sophocles, and there's also some the Homer reference here to what a sage is, something like that. But very thin, as you say, very thin.
Yeah, I'm just a little concerned about our applying stovepipes to what may not have been a stovepipe back in his day, between the development of theater, the development of something like Homer, and such
Correct.
things. Our modern day stovepipes, even the theological sense, our stovepipes may limit our awareness of what they're really trying to integrate from.
Yes. And I would say that even Heidegger is potentially subject to this, because he tries to read tons into the basically the full meaning of this word in Greek. He'll say, right, or what it would mean to Homer, or what it means in the playwrights, right? Whereas some of these philosophers are using these as technical terms, and they only mean what they mean in their corpus, and they don't mean what they mean outside of it.
Right.
Yes, they may incorporate echoes or hints from those other things, but when a philosopher is using a heavily weighted word, not just a word he uses in passing, but one of the core words of his thinking, it means primarily what he determines that it means, and he's laying that down. He's not inheriting it from others. He may use inheritance from others to make allusions, but the fundamental domain of meaning of, for example, the wise in Heraclitus is Heraclitus's own understanding of what that means. Okay, we'll come back
and
to
that's exactly why I felt again that trying to use a lexicon rather than just trying to deal with the Heraclitus use and the Heidegger use, the lexicon would have been just more confusing.
Yeah, and we will go through the saying itself with looking at each Greek word for exactly that reason, and I'll just give you the little tiny bits. You don't need very much, but the little tiny bits that you need to know Greek to see which of the parts are things that you might not know from Greek grammar, and which of the parts can be just dealt with by placeholders, and you can see the whole problem as it is to someone who can read the Greek, right? And realize how little of the actual meaning problem is solved by the knowledge of the language. It's all by the thing he's trying to refer to. Dan.
Sorry first for the background music, as usual it's here. So I read this book some time ago, and I read it again 2 months ago. So one thing that kind of stayed with me after last time, and I think Peter hinted at that issue a few minutes ago. So is this idea that I think Heidegger is trying to present to us that Greek experience of things that come up and stay a little bit and then they disappear. And that's kind of like try to go back to show that that's how beings are, and that's kind of being behind them or whatever is making them present. And he's trying to kind of to like with Nietzsche translation, like Nietzsche, when he puts there being becoming, it's already doing metaphysics. When you translate that sentence from that perspective, or our modern translation, you put substance or something eternal, like Pitt says soul and stuff like that, and I don't know, ideas, forms, or even something like Kant, when you say it's the objects are given there in our minds or something like that. And I think it's very difficult to peel off all these layers and to go back to the original experience. And I think to me, that's kind of what Heidegger is trying to do here. It's try to go back to that. And language is also part of the problem. Like language at that time, and definitely language these days, that kind of try to fix things. We have this tendency to capture being and don't let them go. Don't let them be how they are. Like they come into being and they stay a little bit and then they go away. And yeah, that's it.
Okay, so I largely agree with some of that. I mean, the thing which I see him doing here is he's evoking the fact that Heraclitus is very clearly doing metaphysics, and but metaphysics of a particular kind, and he wants you to see the same thoughts that Heraclitus is thinking in that kind of he's inviting you to engage, to reproduce that track of metaphysical thinking, something like that. And you're right that lots of later interpretations and terminological things and later doctrines get in the way of that. But I think that the invitation can be heard and followed maybe a bit more easily than I won't say that Heidegger thinks. Heidegger is very helpful in doing that. I think that plenty of other philosophers and other put it this way, metaphysically awake consumers of metaphysical thought like this are capable of understanding these things by reproducing the thoughts themselves without getting tripped up in the intervening history or the mere words in which it is expressed. The experience is less private and less insulated and less foreign than I think Heidegger sometimes supposes. And part of that is, he shows that he can bridge that. I mean, it's an impressive performance to bridge that the gap of that much time in history. But I don't think he's remotely the first to have done that. I think plenty of people have understood critical aspects of Heraclitus, maybe if not all of it. I'm not claiming to know all of it. And I think that some of these thoughts have significant later histories and influence, not as merely desiccated word meanings or things compressed into formulas that weren't re-experienced, but as things fully experienced and thought again by the people who read and understood them. But part of that is my own contention about later history, and we don't need to necessarily go into all that. But where I sincerely agree with you is he is trying to evoke that back to what was the actual thought behind this, without any of the intervening sedimented theories that try to put everything in neat boxes for us, getting in the way of seeing what the original thinker thought. We want you to think what the original thinkers thought, see what the original thinker saw, hear him, right? And this is a good text for why you would do that, right? It's about that very thing. But I think it's also quite a doable thing. I think that the thinkers speak to us because they're, first of all, they know what they're doing. They know how to do this. And they are also inviting us to an activity of which we are capable. Let's put it that way. When I say of which we are capable, I don't necessarily mean that everyone, when they're distracted on Tuesday. I mean, if a thoughtful human being with some philosophical awareness, concentrates on it, they can go over this ground again, and they can rediscover, or they can experience for themselves many of the things that the thinker put there. The sayers talk to us, and it is human speech we can comprehend. Anyway, Jim, did you have a question? I saw a hand go up. You might have been.
Yes, because I had a question related to what you're talking about, and
Okay.
it's on page 72 where Heidegger first talks about Heraclitus as a thinker. He only gives us to think.
Yes.
Is the quote, and I had a question there. Is this the standard by which all philosophy must be judged? Always thinking but never knowing? Question on or open to unconcealment. So it was just because that was you guys were talking about this,
Yeah.
and the invitation to think.
The
I thought it
distinction
might
he's
be
making there is between teaching a doctrine and giving you to think.
right.
The teaching a doctrine is a something like a pretense of authority that you could receive as a dogma, and that if you had accepted as a dogmatic formula would convey something to you. Thinking is not like that. Thinking that is only received as a formula doesn't have any thinking left in it, right? Thinking has to be reenacted for yourself, or it hasn't happened. I think that's the actual dichotomy he's making here, or the distinction he's making here. That doesn't mean that every thinker who gives us to think was a skeptic. It doesn't mean that every thinker who got us to think, wasn't convinced of his own intuitive knowledge. Heraclitus is one of the, I think it's Aristotle says somewhere that Heraclitus is as convinced of the things which he only knows intuitively as other men are things they can prove, right? So Heraclitus is an extremely self-assured thinker. Let's put it that way. He's one of the least skeptical men to have walked the earth. But that doesn't mean that he's not a thinker. He's still a thinker, because if you don't think it for yourself, if you don't see the thought, you can't receive it. You haven't received anything. If you just take it away as a doctrine of becoming or something like that and put it in a doxography, it's not going to help you. You're not going to have had the experience. So that's how I took that saying on page 72. I think it does relate to some of what we're saying here, but needing to go over the ground for yourself. Does that help? Okay. All right, we got Dan's reaction. Gui, did I say it wrong again? I always want to say Guy, but you tell me it's
Guy is what it is.
Guy.
Like,
there you go.
Just think of guitar.
Guitar. Okay, there you go. Okay, it's easy.
Yeah. So I really struggled with this thing, and trying to follow the Greek, which I don't know how to appreciate at all. It just really made it difficult for me.
Okay.
So I'm really counting on this discussion to be able to learn and discern what's written there.
Great. That's perfectly fine. As long as you can bring your questions to it, we will help all we can.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, so I want to start with the raw Greek, so to speak. So I'm gonna try just reading it with and we're not even going to translate it first, but I'm going to tell you a little about the constructions it's using, and then the sort of my own most naive translation, right? So the uk ibu alu tau logo accusantus. That's the first line. Homologous sofon eston hen panta. That's the second line. Okay, foreign to you, right? I want to first just point out the uk allo to construction. Uk allo is not this but that, right? So that's it's a construction that has two holes in it, not A but B, right? That's all the uk and allo are doing. The uk is the not and the allo is the but, right? But they refer to one another. The tua after it is a possessive definite article. So we don't have these in English. When you say the in English, you're not saying his. When you say his in English, you're saying something possessive, but you're not saying a the. This is a the his, which they have in Greek, right? It's a possessive form of the definite article. So and the first one is also possessive, right? The emo is me, but it's me possessive, and the tau is the word in front of the logo is like a the, but it's a possessive. And then the logo, that's the word we're always talking about here for this speech. It is genitive, singular, and masculine, right? So whatever else it means, that's just the other thing to know about it. The only verb in this line is the last word, the accusantus. That's the listening, and that's just acoustics is the way to think about that, right? So the same word as our acoustics, but it means listening, hearkening, paying attention to. Heidegger explains that if you
If you listen to something only with your ear apparatus and not with your brain in between, it goes in one ear and out the other, right? So there is that notion that we're not just talking about acoustics in that sense, but acoustics as hearkening, hearing, but that's the verb in the line. Is what I'm trying to say. In the second sentence, the second line, there's also only one verb, and that verb is eston. That's the to be verb, and the to be verb is definitely connecting to sofon, the word immediately in front of it. So sofon eston. The eston even has an inflection that wouldn't be there if it didn't have the possessive that says that its definite article is sofon. So eston is tied like with parentheses to sofon, eston sofons. Wise is. The first word on the line, homologous, that's the prefix homo, same, in front of legen, the same verb that we got up in logo. Logoi is a noun up on the first line, but the legen is the verb form exactly the same thing at the start of the second line, the same word, but with same in front of it. Okay. Then the last two words of the line, hen panta. Hen is one, panta is all. Panta has this this PA suffix on it, which means like alls. It's a plural, right? You have anta, on as one thing and anta as many of them. The pan and penta. Pan is the same pan as in, pan flute or Pan, the god of all, right? Pan means an all or everything, and the ta is alls. It's all the things. It doesn't say things though, it just says the all. And hen, you only see the E on the line because there's a little apostrophe in front of it. That's because the H isn't written in Greek, it's just breathed, but it's H-E-N, hen, which is the word for one. Okay, so very rough literalist translation. Not to me, but to the saying, listen. Same saying, wise is, one all. Okay, again, and now I'm going to accent the verbs. Not to me, but to the saying, listen. Same saying, wise is, one all. I've accented the two verbs there, so you can hear the only words in the lines which are, actions. And there's various, emendations that Heidegger talks about, where people try to add extra verbs at the end of it as glosses and so forth to try to turn hen panta into a separate sentence. It's not a separate sentence as originally written. The only verb in the second line is eston, which is to be. Okay. First of all, questions about the specific words. Any questions about the specific words? No questions about specific words. As Craig was saying, right, if you put all these things in their place, right, you just leave them as the placeholders, you still have something that is oracular sounding, right? You don't know just from having done the translation how all these things are connected to, are fully connected to each other. Not to me, but to the saying, listen, same saying, wise is, one all. That's transliterated into English, what we would have. And we already talked about the not to me, but to the saying, not to me, but to the logos. And we've, Heidegger's going to give you, lots and lots of stuff on the different possible meanings of logos. Logos happens twice, once as noun and once as, it's not really verb, it's a verbal form, the same saying. But you need to understand that that's the same word, saying and same saying, or gathering and same gathering. The fact that same gathering is the word for, same saying is the word for agreement, is the word for saying the same, means it doesn't always mean just the laying that gathers. Maybe it's the same laying that gathers, but homologous also means agreement. It means saying the same. Okay. Same is a term of art in Heraclitus. Wise is a term of art. Logos is a term of art. The not to me, right? The listen, none of those are terms of art. One is a term of art. All is a term of art. Wise is a term of art. Legen is a work of art. Homo is a work of art for the same. All of those are things which occur in other fragments in Heraclitus with freighted, deep meaning, so to speak. But the not to me, but that's, Greek fluff around to make the words fit in, right? Akusantas, the hearkening, the listening, it's meant in its pretty much in its ordinary form with only the inflection Heidegger gives on it. He's not just talking about listening apparatus, he's talking about really understanding. But that sense of acoustic is not a deep word in Heraclitus. He does sometimes contrast those who have ears but can't hear in much the same way that the wisdom literature would, right? He says that seeing is more discerning than listening at one place, right? So he does talk about these things in a few other places in his other aphorisms, but the akusantis is not a critical freighted word the way logos, same saying, wise, is, one, all of those are, metaphysically freighted words. Okay. The one that Heidegger spends most of his time on the whole first half of the essay is explaining the possible meanings of the logos, the saying part. But we should probably talk about the things he reads into that and why those could come to be there in saying. But I also just want to point out that the other thing that trips people up is the second line, this same saying, wise is, one all. There's lots of people that try to put extra articles into that to try to make it flow more in English. They'll put all is one. They'll reverse orders of things and they'll change the last part instead of one all into all is one. There's no is in that fragment, right? The only is in that second part is tied to wisdom, right? So
in Greek, if you say en Panta, the is implied, is my understanding.
it's implied but not voiced, and it's not particularly is that's implied. There is, you are binding them together. You are like putting a set of ratio dots between them, one all, but you're not saying all is one the way you would in English as three things where you're predicating the second of the first, right?
Yeah.
So it is trying to be one idea. That one idea is already a unifying idea, and the one idea is one all. So, and there's other things in Heraclitus where he has that sort of formula, even when the things on the side of that are conventionally thought of as opposites, which he is uniting. Right? War, peace, freedom, slavery. He will use that same construction for things which are often thought of as opposites. And someone could think of one and all as opposites in a certain sense, but there's also something which they share that unites them, right? Okay. But the one all, Heidegger says this is something like the way that Legen as gathering happens. It happens as one all. And I think that that's fair. That's part of what Heraclitus is saying here. I just want to explain that the eston in the line is not referring in the Greek to either the one or the all that come after it. It is directly bound by the actual ending that's used on it. It's not st, it's estin, possessively bound to the sofon, right? So the thing which is wisdom. Wisdom is when agreement, when same saying. Wisdom is when there is same saying.
So wait, so sofon doesn't mean wise person rather than
It means wise.
because it's not ton sofon.
There's no particular person in it. It is masculine accusative singular, right? But that's it.
So it's just okay.
And funnily enough, you would use the same word if it were a neuter in vocative, but this is not a vocative, but you would use the same word. But it's directly named. The sense of the ending is that sofon is being directly named. And it is what is. I like to say, one way you can read this is Heraclitus defines the wise. Wise is same saying, along with the logos, one all.
Lack of wisdom would be not same saying. Lack of wisdom would be not listening to the logos. Lack of wisdom would be not one all, or not knowing one all, or not saying one all. Now, the other thing I want you to understand is that the unifying one all at the end of the line, the gathering sense of Lagan, and the same sense of homo are also kind of parallel structures. They're kind of parallel things. What do I mean by that? The same saying is a uniting. Same saying is already a bringing together. There's bringing together in the first line and there's bringing together in the second line. The bringing together in the first line happens only from the logos part. All the rest of the first line is distinguishing what you should listen to, right? But that there is a something that you should listen to such that agreement with it would constitute and define wisdom. Wisdom is agreement with the logos. Well, stop. Right? Yes, that's the first important thing to understand is being said here about the sofon eston. And Heidegger brings some of that out, but then he translates the sofon as fateful. But he's right to say that something fateful comes to pass when homo Lagan occurs. But the faithful that comes to pass is wisdom. Wisdom is when homo Lagan. Wisdom is when same saying. Wisdom is saying the same as the logos. Wisdom is, here's a word from a previous couple of things back, agreement. Wisdom is agreement with the truth, not with other people, not between the words and the thought, but between what the sayer says and what the truth is. There is a sense of truth as agreement here. Wisdom as same saying. But the same saying is what the saying, the capital L saying announces. And what the capital saying announces is not a mystery. It's not anything that happens to come along. The one logos is saying one thing, and the one thing that it is saying is one all. The fact that there is a one order uniting everything that is, that there is a gathering order behind everything, that gathering order is what wisdom is saying with it. Wisdom is harmony with that order. That is what the logos says. That is what wisdom is, and that is what actually is one all. Okay. I'm not quite done with my gloss, but I want to get reactions to what I've said so far to see if any of this is making at least as much sense as Heidegger's reading or not.
Right. And I think so. One thing I point out is this homologous, this agreement.
Yes.
Is not the specific agreement you get with Plato, Aristotle, where you say something is a horse because the horse agrees with the form of horse.
Yes.
It's very specific. This is a broader. You're concurrent.
We are the concurrence that the logos being described here is not concurrence with a single fragment of speech, and it's not a concurrence with some essential predication about an individual thing. We are at the level of same saying with the united message of united being or something like that, right? Now, one way to think about that is that Plato explicitly sets himself the task of trying to understand the many rather than the one that he thought was understood by Parmenides, and to go down the path of doxa and mortals to explain the being of the particulars. Fine. Leave aside that as, Plato as sideshow. What Heraclitus is doing here is he's still talking at this level of metaphysics, of what unites everything, about the one all, about the overwhelming order, about the overarching order. And of that, he is saying wisdom is agreement with that order.
wisdom is hearing that order in things. Wisdom is hearing that order rather than the speaker. And yes, that's okay. Dan, question.
Yeah, I'm kind of now I'm reading. I'm in the middle of that book, Phenomenological Interpretation of Kant's Critique, and it's basically Heidegger saying that all Kant's critique it's about synthesis, where like how things are coming together, and this is pretty much like this gathering in Heraclitus, and his point is they are trying to take apart Kant and say that this synthesis is not happening in mind or in the transcendental mind or in reason or imagination, or he's trying to say it's happening well it's in time, like that he wrote that book immediately after being in time or as a continuation. And this is pretty much the same idea that try to say go outside yourself, go outside your mind, and things happen. Don't listen to like don't stay there. Go to the place where things really happened.
So where you're entirely right here is Heraclitus is definitely not talking about any of this wisdom that is being listened to, wisdom that is listening to as being something only in one person's mind at all, right? This is a cosmic lesson, right? The world is saying this to you. The world is saying this to every mind that pays attention to the order of things, right? If you pay attention to the order of things, you see one all, and you see that wisdom is agreement with that uniting and with that one all, right? So agreement with the one all does not mean it's some people get caught up on what that means in terms of content. It's not a content thing about this or that particular. It is seeing the order in things. The multiple other aphorisms of Heraclitus then talk about that wisdom, right? He will say, and one of the things that's actually in our passages, that one only is wise, and that's the one which is saying is willing and not willing to be called by the name of Zeus, which we can get to. That's at where does he get to that part? It's still in our yes, the bottom of 72, right? Which is translated, the one which alone is wise does not want and yet does want to be called by the name of Zeus, and want is exactly the wrong word there. It's more like allows. But the beginning of that line, hen to sofon monon, right? That's the same one. And then to sofon, that's the same wisdom. And the monon alone, like mono, right? The one which is alone is wise. There's only one alone which is wise, the one. And then that's also related to the rest of the line. Does not want and yet does want to be called by the name of Zeus. Allows, does not allow. And we can talk about why that's said in all of those ways. But there is something like a one wisdom steering all things. And wisdom, human wisdom, is agreement with the gathering order announced in the steering of all things. Something like that. There's another one of his fragments, which is one of his more obscure to many people, but not to me, where he says, of all the writings I've read, none of them reach this far to see that the wise is separated from everything. That's the principle of the wise separated from the principle of the pan, right? So that's explicitly there in Heraclitus. He's got a notion of the wise, which is something like the governing intelligence of the whole, something like that. And that alone is wise, and human wisdom is same saying, with the order seen in that steering. He says the wise the lightning, he says the lightning steers what is, it's also the wise. So there's a notion of a steered whole, a steered one all. And I think Heidegger is right to bring out in the later parts of this discussion, where he brings out that this hen word, this one here, is a word for the being of beings in Heraclitus. It's also a word for something like a wisdom of the whole. Craig.
So I don't want to use the word mystical, but I get the sense that he's speaking beyond intellectual assent to almost more of a state of being.
Yes, I think he's. It's fair to say that this is mystical religious consciousness of a direct and intuitive kind, but it's not seen in some outside the world experience. It's seen from the experience of the order of the world.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Of which we are deeply immersed in.
Yes.
Opposed to separate from.
Yes.
And it's recognizing that immersion and that belonging more so than intellectually assenting to something that's outside of us.
Correct. It's even saying that human wisdom is same saying with that. He'll even in his discussion of how of minds and other minds say something along the lines of, this is there and patent on the face of how the world is and works. It is the common. It is what is an emerging presence before us all the time. But most people hide from it, run away from it, and seek to replace it with their own understanding, their own intelligence. They have separate consciousness and separate minds that try to recede from this whole, instead of being out in the middle of it, plugged into it, and learning from it and accepting it, something like that. So that's the overall sense you get from Heraclitus, is that when he's trying to understand what human intelligence and non-intelligence are, non-intelligence is secession from the common instead of embrace of the wisdom steering all, something like that. There's other things, he has to say about that. He says from this, to God, all things are just, beautiful, and fair, but men have made some things just and others unjust. Yeah, there's all kinds of things that go into his understanding of what that principle steering the whole are, right? He also has his own cosmology of it. He says this all was never brought into being by any god or man, but is, always was, is now, and ever will be an ever living fire, kindled in measures and going out in measures, right? So he has a whole cosmology that goes along with this, and it is a living whole, if I can put it that way, a steered and living whole, and the wisdom steering that whole is separated from everything, but it is still a steering principle. The word for that steering principle is, he says, lightning, and Heidegger makes much of the lightning he calls it. Lightning, keranos, that is doing the steering is sky fire. It's the fire of heaven, which is another word for Zeus.
Right.
And when he says that it is willing and not willing to be called by the name of Zeus, he's saying not the Greek Zeus, not your mythological Zeus, but a sky fire that counts as something like a god of the whole that sears the whole. Maybe that, right? But there's another meaning of the wants and does not want, spoken of not as in want and not want, but permits and does not permit. Again, multiple meanings. One of the meanings of the word is wants, the other is permits. In what way does it want or permit? Well, maybe in the way that it doesn't do any permitting or not permitting at all in the first place, right? It's not whether or not the thought is applicable to the thing of which it is thought, but the fact that the thing of which it is thought is not going to be doing any permitting or permitting in the matter, right? So it's a very impersonal steering of the whole that he is thinking of. It is
a Heraclitean version of a god of the philosophers that he is thinking of. I think, though, it's also fair to say, as Heidegger does here, that it is a word for the being of beings, right?
Yeah, that's the next step. Does Heidegger follow along with this?
He says that the hen here is a word for the being of beings. He's going to relate it also to the aletheia and lethe stuff, which we'll come back to in the fourth section. But sorry, Jim had a question. You're still on mute.
You're muted.
Trying to unmute it. There you go. Yeah, I had a question specifically about that line already. So if it's okay, I'd like to
Sure,
ask
sure.
it. Okay, so the lightning abruptly lays before an instant, everything is present in the light of its presencing. The question I had is, does it? And then how do we interpret the slow fade after the flash? Could this be analogous to Plato's cave?
So the sense that what the lightning means to Heraclitus is that it's a rapid illumination followed by recurrence of darkness.
Yep.
Is all Heidegger gloss.
Okay.
I don't find it in Heraclitus. Heraclitus says lightning steers the whole. The skyfire steers the whole. And the word for steering is our same word for cybernetic, right? The steering, right?
Yeah.
So the accent in Heraclitus is not on the temporariness of lightning. It's on the skyness, the fireness, the seeming willfulness, the seeming directedness, right? The notion of steering, and some of that is referring to things which popular Greek religion ascribed to Zeus, but it's borrowing it, not indebted, not enslaved to it, if I can put it that way. It's just using that to make the point that something like a destining order steers all things, and the way in which that destining order steers all things is an ordering wisdom that can be thought of as fire from on high, something like that. And the word he's using for fire is not just for the elemental fire, right? You have to understand that for Heraclitus, fire is a word for life, and a word for intelligence, and a word for something like soul. And not because he thinks souls are made of fire, like primitive materialist things, but because fire, life, soul are not different concepts to Heraclitus. They are energy, activity. The thing that you need to hear in the word fire is energy, right? He's not saying fire as one of the four elements, because it's the only element of which everything is made for Heraclitus. It's the primitive underlying. But it's the primitive underlying as a principle of living activity, not simply as a dumb matter sitting there, right, inertly. Okay, so I'm explaining that there's a whole cosmology in all this. There's a whole metaphysics in all this, but all of that is partly there in the notion of wise, because we get wise as one only is wise. And the one only that is wise is also the same hen of the hen Panta. But human wisdom is hearkening to the logos, and same saying with the one thing that is wise. Okay. Now you can relate all this to the appearing of being. You can relate all this to the being of beings. You can relate all this to the truth, to cosmic order. It's all of those things. It's a metaphysics. It's a direct intuitive metaphysics. It has the elements of noetic intuition that people tend to associate with mysticism, but it's not primarily mystical. It's primarily meant to be things which Heraclitus thinks if you have eyes to see, you can see every day. He thinks this order is manifest.
Right. So maybe instead of mystical, maybe a better word is intuitive.
Yes.
Where I see the analogies in these passages is with the origin of consciousness and the bicameral mind, the idea that we're a split brain, and we have the rational symbolic processing part of our brain, and we have our intuitive part. And I think part of the appeal here is to the intuitive part, that it's not something that you can just put out in language and somebody else can read it and get exactly what you meant. The rational language, but
So it's not, you're right that it's not meant to be so encapsulated in rational language that anyone who understands the terms has the thought, right? But the reason is that he's trying to ground these evocative sayings in an independent direct experience of the phenomena to which he is pointing. So he only has to point at it, right? His model in this is oracular sayings in the Oracle at Delphi. I only have to point at the phenomena, and you're supposed to go look at the phenomena to verify these things for yourselves, right? I don't have to spell it out, let alone demonstrate it to you. He's not attempting to coerce your mind that you have to have this thought afterwards. He's just inviting you to look at the same thing he can see. And the thing which is always amusing, staggering Heraclitus and gives him the reputation as a misanthrope is that he can't understand why everyone can't see it, right? We'll get to that in the fourth section, where the underlying question is, how can they hide from that which never sets? Being is in your face all day. The world is worlding at you in an ordered manner all the time, every waking moment. How the hell can you run away and hide from it? The world is hitting you over the head with the maddening, tone of an incantation every single second. Order, 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 order. How the hell can you miss it? That's the note you get in Heraclitus, right? So he doesn't think that it's mysterious in that sense. He thinks it's overwhelming, and if people aren't, hearkening to it, paying attention to it, there's something else going on with them, but not with the order or its apparentness. He thinks it's apparent.
Yeah, both you and Pete are reminding me of the book that Ian McGilchrist just recently published in 2 volumes called The Matter with Things, with a subtitle of Our Brains, Our Delusions, and the Unmaking of the World.
Okay. You want to give us a gloss?
Gloss of 1,000 pages of book. Yeah, kind of hard.
Just the unmaking of the world part would do.
The issue there being the right brain, left brain that he's still been working on, right hemisphere, left hemisphere, and how we have bought into one half of the hemisphere and forgotten the other hemisphere.
Okay, yeah, I get it.
And it's the integration of those that leads to breaking down of the delusions and the unmaking of the world, which goes a little bit more back to where I was asking, is this really only an intellectual thing, or is this actually more an integrative or intuitive, as Pete used the word, aspect that Heraclitus is talking to? So I think I like the integrated intuitive much better than the rational.
Yeah, I mean, my partial objection is to the term rational being exclusively used for the if I can put it this way, the procedural ratiocination. It's not obvious that that intuitive understanding is not also rational in some sense. But leave that aside. It's not as procedural, let's put it that way. Okay. I want to get to the single biggest issue I have with the.
We have a hand up, by the way.
Oh, I'm sorry. Guy.
Right. So as I'm listening, a couple of things that are occurring to me, and let me just use different language and see if there's correspondence.
Sure.
So the first thing Okay, I'll just go straight to it. It's like the two terms that seem to get at this are insight and attunement. So it's like Heraclitus is attuned, his brain is attuned in some way where he has access not just to the concrete structure of the world, but he can actually see, experience the patterns that make up the underlying structure of the world, which are invisible to concrete perception.
Except for the part about them being invisible, because he thinks they're visible. Yeah, yes, you're right that it's about an attunement, but he thinks that that attunement is maybe easier than you might think it is. And he also thinks that the thing which it reveals is not fundamentally something hidden. He thinks it's fundamentally something obvious, but usually missed.
Right, but it's obvious if you have the attunement, and it's invisible if you don't have the attunement. I mean, the attunement is the translating factor that enables discernment. So it's like psychologically, we're looking at 70+% of the population is concrete in their perception. So they're just looking at the surface, they're looking at facts. Maybe 30% of the population is hardwired to see the world in a more abstract way. And of that 30%, I would estimate less than 3 or 4% really know how to use that attunement to see the world clearly, and not just mess it up with possibilities and patterns and making stuff up that is not there to be seen. And so the same saying is an attunement of, it's a perception then that's awakened by an insight.
So the hearkening is an attunement, yes.
Yeah.
How rare it is of dramatically small interest to Heraclitus, but maybe it's rare. He wouldn't care. He thinks that all rational human beings are capable of and responsible for having that degree of rational attunement in order to count as sane. That's his own stated take on it, but he doesn't think most people pass that test. He just thinks the test is easy, and the fact that people are flunking it is a scandal, right? So he's not saying how reasonable or unreasonable the test is based on how many people pass it. He has an internal evidence sort of sense of how reasonable it is as an expectation to make of people. In terms of the same saying is not simply the hearing attunement, it's a proper response to it. So the proper response doesn't follow from the hearing. It's an additional fact, and the reason for the aphorism is he's stressing this additional fact, right? Someone could listen to the logos but not realize that wisdom is same saying along with it. They should, and that's the point of the aphorism, is to urge this, right? Urging same saying. Sorry, go ahead.
This is about communication. This is about the use of language to communicate. The thing that's
not simply to communicate. It's not simply to communicate. It's a matter of whether or not the listener is. You talk about attunement for the hearing. It's also whether or not the attuned listener who is hearing the whole is in conformity with an instance of loyal to obeying that whole, or is in defiant rebellion to that whole, is running from that whole, is saying, shut up whole, I got my own message, it's this, right? All of those things are the opposite of same saying. Does that make sense?
Yep. What I was
the
trying to
norm
get to,
being laid down. Go ahead.
What I was trying to get to was Heraclitus has an attunement, and when he's experiencing that attunement, he collects or experiences insights. So he doesn't need language to have the insight. The insight is nonverbal, and that's what I was meaning by.
It's not clear. It's not clear. The much of this is coming out in the language, and he's calling it a listening, and he's calling it a listening to the saying. And it's the language that he's listening to, what he's hearing, is not simply other people speaking. That is certainly true, but he himself
does not pretend that this is a silent observance of his own happening in the interior of his consciousness. He has no such model. He on the contrary, he thinks that this is a common in front of everyone, and that private minds are secessions from the common, seceding away from the common, isolating themselves into their private opinions, even though they all know that the truth is what is common. He thinks of the common and the truth and this thing he's being attuned to as being the open and public and manifest thing. And he thinks of private opinions as not the original source of truth that then has to be expressed in order to be communicated, but private opinions are secession from the common truth. They are people isolating themselves in their own little bubbles of opinion from the world. And he thinks that that is an active operation on that part. It's not that you first are in touch only with your private understanding of the world and then you have to communicate with the rest of the world. No, you're first in the world, understanding the world, seeing the world, part of the world, in the truth, and you have to secede from it almost willfully to be so blind as to put your own opinion above truth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and again, translation, it's like if we look at our left neocortical hemisphere, it's where language lives. The right hemisphere is where imagery lives. And I don't think he's saying that, because the insight is a revelation. And I think that thinking, the left hemisphere, gets in the way of the insight. You can't have the world reveal itself to you when you're in thinking mode, because thinking mode is judgment mode. You're making judgments about things rather than having open perception, where the underlying structure of the world.
Yeah, I'm telling you
itself.
that the entire machinery that you're importing here is not Heraclitus's, it's your own. And he's not commenting on that, but there's no reason to believe he agrees with a particle of what you just said. None.
Okay, I'm just trying to make it intelligible to myself.
I understand. What I'm saying is, if you want to understand the thought of a thinker other than yourself, you have to think his thought, not yours.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, so I understand where you're coming from, and it's definitely a common thing we all do to try to take our own theory about how intellect works and project it back onto someone and see if he's thinking, if else makes sense of them. But with thinkers of this magnitude, you really got to take them their own way and see what they agree with or challenge about your own scheme of things. Afterwards, you can see if your own later understanding makes more or less sense of them than they do on their own. But you first have to see the disagreement. Sorry, Dan.
Going back to what was said. So I think first that there is an issue of attunement, and that's to be amazed. And to be amazed, that allows you to see this, that happens there. It's kind of like it's too close to us, and being amazed allows you to see this, like see all this truth that is there. And I think that, so going back, I think it is an issue of attunement. And then we have this, I think that all this discussion about, reason, intuition, or left versus right brain, this is kind of like it's, well, whatever Kant did, it's kind of happening too late. It doesn't matter. So whatever is happening there, like in being or in time or whatever. And then this is how we argue post fact. So the synthesis or the gathering already happened. The truth already happened. It's like when we employ these categories, we are kind of too late for what happened.
The thought of the insight has already occurred, and we're chasing after it, trying to throw concept nets after it, but the phenomena has already happened, and we should just pay attention to the fact that it already happened. And it didn't need any of those concept nets to do so.
And the truth already, yeah, and the truth already happened. It's there. We try to construct and say, well, we combine, I don't know, intuition with reasons, or the left with the right, or we approach it by reason or by intuition. It's already happened. It's there. Like it's public, as you said, or it's
right. So one of the reasons I keep harking on this public point is I see echoes of this point in Heraclitus in some of the later stuff in Plato that we were reading in the Theaetetus. When Socrates in the Theaetetus talks about the common as this place where we have access to judgments of being about things that aren't simply coming from the content of the perception, he is appealing to this
notion of a common to which reason itself has access, where reason itself doesn't mean calculative ratiocination. It means something more like noetic understanding, intuitive noetic understanding. And the fact that there is a realm of intuitive noetic understanding where access to something like truth is not simply a matter of perception in the sense of the particular content of the perceived, but is something more immediately mind-like than that, so to speak, I think is a point of contact and agreement between Plato and this sort of understanding in Heraclitus. They both have the highest place in their understanding of human intellectual capacities for something like direct intuitive understanding. That's not necessarily the case with some later thinkers. It's not true of like a Lockean empiricist, for example, to take an entirely modern example. But it is true in the stuff you see about the discussion of reason in Theaetetus, which is part of the transition from the knowledge as perception versus to knowledge as opinion change. But it's also, I think, here the things which we're talking about as Heraclitus is attuned to see these things. He thinks of them as manifest. I agree that there is some special attunement involved in them. I also think they're just direct intellectual intuition. I mean, and I don't think that, I think Heidegger would also agree with that. I think that he also has a notion of this sort of direct intellectual intuition. Now, is language important for how that is articulated? Maybe, right? Certainly he is using terms here like logos, hen, panta, etc., to organize the thoughts over it. So these are not disembodied images, if I can put it that way, right? They are in language. They are happening in language. Heraclitus is a linguistic thinker, right? That is, he's a writer of compact aphorisms that try to convey these complicated thoughts. But the things that he's pointing to as things which these compact aphorisms can convey are meant to be direct intuitive insights about, metaphysical categories, something like that. So, so what's the point? This is how a lot of Greek metaphysics is done, is the first point, right? The pre-Socratic metaphysics specifically, Heraclitus and Parmenides specifically, it was also there in Anaximander, although it was so little to go on in his case. And I don't think it dies with Parmenides. I think it's also there in Plato, although in Plato, it's not the only thing there, and there's also a lot of other more procedural reasoning going on, if you get me. But it's still there in the dialogues. Okay, Jim, you're still on mute.
I guess the question I have was, how do we know how do we know? I'm trying to, and I want to take Heraclitus on his own terms in his own way, but I'm having like, how, if it's something I'm like in my mind, I'm thinking I already know this, but I don't know that I know it.
Sure.
How do you get help from others to be like, oh yeah, that thing? Sure.
And Parmenides' 3 ways will be about how there is a way where you know already, and there's an unreliable way of opinion and doxa that is in which being and not being are the same and not the same, and we'll get into that next time. But for Heraclitus, this aphorism itself was trying to tell us that, and it wasn't telling us that the way in which we make sure we're not messing up is to listen to the speakers around us and double check our insights against their verbal acuity, right? That would be listening to them, not to the logos, right? And the admonition in the line is the exact opposite. Don't listen to the speaker, listen to the account, listen to the argument, listen to the nature of things, listen to the evidence in the gathering of things. The other thing I'd point out here is that well, we come back to this gathering aspect, because I think there's another thing there related to language, which we might go into. But I don't know if that answers your question. He's not giving you, he's not a skeptic who thinks he needs to prove things to the skeptical. He offers things to those who have ears to hear, and those who do not hear, he passes by with his nose in the air. That's his answer.
And with Theaetetus, maybe you could corroborate this. One thing as I was reading that that always has popped out to me and sticks with me is the difference between a competition and a conversation. But he helped a lot at the end of that section by saying, the evidence for whether or not you're having one of those is you'll have no family or friends that want to be around you if you're always competing when they think it's supposed to be a conversation. And to me, that immediately, I'm like, oh yes. Is it like that?
When you talk about the Socratics and Plato in particular, there is an actual method for these things. That is a conversational method. That is dialectic. That is, the testing of things, the testing of arguments. That is meant to have more of this proving, disproving character. It's not going to actually prove things, but it can undermine and refine them or something like that. It can improve them. We don't see anything like such a method in Heraclitus. Heraclitus is not submitting his insights about the nature of the whole to critical argument before the people he meets in the marketplace, and if the Ephesians do not agree with him, going back and trying to revise it so he can get something they agree with. On the contrary, he's an isolated, contemptuous philosopher who lives as a hermit on the outskirts of town, and when people come to him, they're amazed at the way he lives, and they're amazed at his why is this poor man so contemptuous of everyone he meets? That's their attitude towards him. Yeah, he's a very isolated, solitary thinker in that respect.
I can say this, and then I'm done. Whatever he's talking about, I don't want to claim I really completely understand, because I don't. I really don't, but there's something about it. Whatever it is, I want it. It's something. I'm like, I want that, but I don't even know what the hell it is I'm wanting. But I feel like I want to know. I want to understand because I want what he's talking about, even though I don't know what it is. That's just totally weird to me.
Yeah, I understand. You can see that there's something admirable if you could understand what it is in what he seems to be doing. What I think that's a reaction to is the sense he's gives off, so to speak, that he is attuned, whatever, plugged into enough of the nature of things that he can have direct metaphysical insight, something like that, and yeah, something like that. To me, that's the same as saying, and this is, maybe a little bit he is intellectually alive as a philosopher. He's thinking in Heideggerian terms. But there's a whole tradition of them doing this, right? He's not the only one. That doesn't mean he's not special. All these people are special. Okay. Other people's comments before I go to my next. I want to get to sofon. Okay, sofon. So Heidegger translates the sofon, that is the wise in the passage as I translated it, as the fateful. And the question is why? He wants to explain that something important is going on here. He does tell you that it means wise. This is on page 68. But what does wise mean? And by the end of the paragraph, he's going to tell you that sofon is not the fate. It is the fateful and not fate. As the appropriate behavior of mortals. When such a thing happens, something fateful comes to pass. The fateful comes to pass insofar as one all. So why does Heidegger call this the fateful? Why does he drop the word wise and substitute the word fateful?
Because it's inevitable.
Because it's fateful in the sense that it has to.
Well, we're talking here specifically about the end Panta.
Not even the hen Panta. Before the hen Panta, right? At the end of the line, right? Sofon eston, this end of 67. When homologous occurs, then sofon comes to pass. We read sofon eston when translates sofon correctly as wise. But what does wise mean? Does it simply mean knowing? But he thinks it's not just that. Of what sort? Of the sort that maintains itself in the abode of mortals. Thus sofon signifies that which can adhere to whatever has been indicated, can devote itself to it, can dispatch itself towards it. Because it is appropriate, it becomes skillful. And he gives a bunch of Greek etymology, not Greek, German etymologies. In this fashion, we hit upon the genuine meaning of sofon, which we translated as faithful, geschicklich. But faithful from the start says something more than skillful.
Yeah, I guess another word, since he's using the geschickt word, it's destined.
Yes, destined, history. There's a history note here.
But
You know, when he talks about how this is an historic activity because it reaches to the plane of history, it's destined, it's fateful, it's historic.
right, I wouldn't go as far as history because I think that's more complicated. We get into the history of being, but just the fateful destining, I say inevitable, because that's the way it works.
But only when homologous, only when same saying happens. Same saying is what brings forth this thing. Without same saying, this does not happen. The statement is saying not that Hein Panta always comes to pass. That may even be true. But what it is saying is that wisdom is, wise is, sofon eston, when homologous. So, and Heidegger's understanding of that first part of the passage, I think, is correct, right? Homologous is the gate which determines that sofon eston. When homologous and sofon eston. Go ahead. Sorry.
What's the difference between sofon and Sophia? Just so I get it.
Sophia is feminine. Not much more.
All right.
It's the same root word. It's the word for wisdom. The difference is sofon here is masculine, accusative, and singular.
And Athena has Sophia.
Sophia later became one of the words for wisdom as an attribute of God, especially in the Greek East, and it was also one of the most important members of the plemera in the Gnostics, and it has all kinds of other later, afterlife as a deified thing. But there's no hint of that here. There's no anthropomorphizing of sofon here. Sofon is wise. If there's anything in Greek that might be a root word that it is related to, and it's not obvious that it is, but there's a related word in Greek for reliable, clear-speaking, accurate, precise. That's the saphe. But it's the only other Greek word adjacent to sofon that means anything other than wisdom, and it means something like precise, exact, or clear, especially with regard to speech. But sofon is just wise. But here it's fateful, and I put it to you that because Heidegger is trying to translate into what matters to him, the thing that he sees mattering for Heraclitus.
Yeah, and here he's, I think there's a distinction with sofon is used later, say in Plato's Sophist, where it means a particular type of you have a certain episteme, and then you can build on that to get sofon. But here he's using a broader sense of sofon just to make sense of what's going on.
I don't know that's broader, and I have to give a little bit more of that history fleshed out, because I think that part of why he steers away from wise might be the way in which sofon is used as sophistry and philosophy, as that use of the word. But okay, the sofon here is homologous. The other sofon we get at the bottom of page 72 is an attribute only of hen. One alone is wise, right? The one that alone that is wise, it may or may not be willing to be called Zeus, right? But one alone is wise. There's a highest wisdom that is almost a deified steerer of the whole. And there is the human wisdom of same saying with the order of the whole, something like that. By the time you're at Plato, why does Socrates claim not to be wise, but only to be a philosopher, right? The answer is because only God deserves the attribute wisdom. This is in the Phaedo, right? He'll say, I can't claim to be wise. I can only claim that I love wisdom. To actually be wise, that would be an attribute of a god, not of a man, right? He self-deprecatingly backs away from the claim to wisdom by ascribing wisdom to God. It's a godly thing. I don't think that that's far from this meaning in Heraclitus, as wisdom is something which is only properly predicated of something godly, and philosophy distinguishing itself from wisdom as love of wisdom is also saying that some of its love of wisdom is love of a deity, or at least a deity of truth, something like that. And that sense is meant in the Socratics, in at least Socrates, Plato, leave aside Aristotle, right? So because there's no sense here that Heraclitus is using this word for a human techne of skillful lawyers, right? I don't think there would be any problem with just translating this as the wise and then thereby connecting it to the other things Heraclitus says about the wise, like one only is wise, etc., in his other aphorisms. But I think that Heidegger steers away from that because fateful is a word including all of its connotations of destiny and its connotations of rising to the level of where history actually happens, that are valued words in Heidegger's own self-understanding, something like that. He's translating from Heraclitean value structure to his own, something like that. Wisdom doesn't have that place for Heidegger. It doesn't have that that exalted place that it has for Heraclitus or even for the Socratics, at least in the same way. Dan?
Isn't like wise the Parmenides when he is like the goddess Aletheia takes him and shows him, and he just faithfully report what sees. He participate, like it's a faithful description what's there, and that's
Yes.
as you say is the same, saying the same.
That's right.
Participating in it.
Correct. Same saying with what the gods say to you is wisdom. That's the thing you get in both Heraclitus and Parmenides, and the only difference that Socrates makes to that is he says, I can't do that. Only gods can do that. I can only love that. I can't be that. And that's the humble step you get in the Socrates of the Phaedo compared to that. But you're right. That's that same sense in Heraclitus and Parmenides as same saying what the divine wisdom announces is the notion of wise that you get in the PreSocratics. And I think that sense is clear, and I think we can understand it. I think it fits into the whole understanding of, going this way, the history of Greek metaphysics that Heidegger himself is laying out over the course of this book, I think correctly, that there's this whole, they're talking about the same when he comes back to the same that they're talking about, and that they're trying to say something about the being of beings. I think all of that is sound, right? That his picture that there is a unified tissue of Greek metaphysics here is correct. The question is, why does Heidegger not adopt those terms when describing it? He instead goes to this fateful business. And I put it to you that the reason is fateful is a more meaningful word to Heidegger in his own understanding than wise is. He contrasts what he's doing as thinking with philosophy as it understood itself in the Socratic past. Why? Thinking has to somehow be something different from philosophy as it was historically understood. But something being being destined, and something being fateful, and something being part of the destiny of being appearing to man, those are praise in Heidegger's own terms.
and wisdom isn't, not in the same way. It rings too Socratic.
Even though Socrates says he doesn't know what it is, he only loves it, or
Correct. It's still Socrates's frame of reference. Socrates' frame of reference is his ordering principle is a wisdom that only God has, that he does not have, and that he loves. It's still his ordering principle. It's still his highest. It's just he doesn't think he has it.
and presumably none of the sophists have sophos.
No, the difference according to the Socratics, at least, the sophists are people that think that they have it when they don't, right? But yes, and maybe that odor is enough to drive drive Heidegger away from it. But I think there's a little more going on there. He could easily have connected the wisdom he translated it there with the wisdom at the end of 72 without going through the fateful and destiny. But instead he goes through the fateful and destiny. The point is, I don't see anything in here from Heraclitus himself, which has the accent on, if I can put it this way, the historical trajectory, destining, unfolding, happening, actuality note in all of it. That note, that theme that Heidegger brings in is only there in the notion that wisdom is what is steering the whole. That's the only point of contact between them. And I think that for Heraclitus, that is a much more, it is a much less history, actuality, destiny focused thought. There's much less time in it. There may be unfolding becoming in it, maybe steering destiny in it, but or steering in it, but I don't think it's the same notion of destining history that you're getting from Heidegger's way of translating it. I think that's an import, and I think the reason for the import is just that these are Heidegger's way of making it more faithful to his own ears and to the ears of his students. He thinks that they will hear that as being of greater importance. Right? Spiritual destiny is of importance to Heidegger and Heideggerians in a way that a wisdom behind the whole is not. Am I wrong?
So I'm still I'm leery of the historical thing of some evolving process. I go back to my inevitability, and because he's on this page to 72.
Yes.
He's talking about the capital Lambda logos.
Mm-hmm. And he says the logos, the hind Panta, would accordingly be nothing other than the highest God. The essence of logos thus would offer a clue concerning the divinity of the God.
Right, and so you can never not be in Zeus's world. That's a sense of inevitability, that you're always in the world of lightning, and I take lightning here to be a case of event of Ereignis. So you're always going to come across things through physis. Things are going to appear to you, and they're going to happen like lightning. And that's inevitable. That's going to happen. Anything that appears to you is going to appear to you through the process of Ereignis. It's going to appear in the clearing in every case, because that's what it means for something to appear to you.
I understand what you're saying, and I agree that fits Heidegger's own scheme of these things, but there's nothing in the Heraclitus about the events appearing in it to you.
I had a question for, I guess, Pete and you both. because you mentioned evolving, that's right, a problem with the time or history thing. Would it be more like the unconcealment aspect is always been there? The way that we see it in our modern, let's say at this point in time for us, it's almost like an insignificant fuzzy detail about how we see it happening at our time with our words and our verbiage and all that stuff. But the unconcealment part is the thing that has always been there. It never really changes.
So
you
you
know,
gotta be careful, because I mean, there's the unconcealment in the sense of aletheia, truth to the Greeks, and there's also, as Heidegger is thinking of it, as unconcealment actually does require the das sign in which the unconcealment occurs as the event of the appearing. And there's much more of that note on the human responding pole of the appearing in Heidegger than there is in Heraclitus.
it wouldn't have to
Heraclitus-
evolve. I'm asking, does it
I know.
not have to evolve?
Okay, the point I'm making, Jim, is that Heraclitus is not Heidegger. And you can't assume that he agrees with Heidegger on these questions, right? So the way Heidegger would view that relationship may be closer to what Pete is saying, but I'm not seeing those accents on the appearing to, on the oneself, or even on the inevitable.
Yeah, I get it. Okay.
In Heraclitus, as opposed to in Heidegger's gloss in
Right.
Heraclitus.
Right. I got it. Okay.
Jan.
Heidegger always said that like the Greeks were able to manifest aletheia because they were not able to express it, like they were not kind of directly aware of it. And probably it's also the same, he said something like they were able to create this inception, the original inception, because they were not thinking of it as something historical, that it's starting there. So in a way, kind of, it's Heidegger is saying that that's why they were able to do it, because they were not aware of it. So probably it's kind of this kind of explanation for what you're trying to.
I think that's fair. That's his understanding of it. I think that there's a directness, and from Heidegger's point of view, maybe a naivete about about Greek metaphysics and about the Greeks' direct approach to this. Whether or not to understand those things in a more having passed through the pole of an intervening subjectivism, unified subjective and objective both between event, is a significant progress over what the Greeks were able to naively see, may be left to the reader, right? Because it's not obvious that the Heideggerian formulation of those things is superior to the naive Greek one. The naive Greek one has an immediacy and an evidence for it that is, to say the least, more obscure in the Heideggerian phenomenological one, right? Now, that may mean it's still too naive, possibly, right? But they're at least different. And what I don't want to do is, and I see Heidegger doing a little bit of here, is reading himself back into what Heraclitus must have seen. Now, I think part of why he's doing that is he's trying to show a value in being able to see those things, I think fairly, but I think he is here, specifically not just in this translation, but in the reason for it and the point he's trying to make with it. I do see a distortion of Heraclitus's thought in the direction of his own thought in this reading of sofon as faithful, right? I mean, leave aside the on the surface aspect of it. The reason why he's doing it and the place to which he is taking it is not simply to think a thought that Heraclitus had again, to go over that ground again. It's instead to weave the things he sees Heraclitus thinking more into his own thought. He's translating in the other direction. He's translating Heraclitus into his modern thinking. And that may help bring them together. It may help show the value in what Heraclitus is doing, but we have to notice that he's doing it, right? This is not simply reconstruction of Heraclitean thought. Okay. Why did I keep coming back to these issues? By the end of this book, we will see that
Heidegger can see Heraclitus seeing things about being that are, I think, phenomenologically accurate, that Heidegger himself agrees with, that Heidegger is impressed by, I think rightly so, and that some of his other claims have denied the Greeks were capable of or had done. Now, there's already a version of that in this one where he says that this this understanding in Heidegger was only a streak of lightning that disappeared. Right? He goes back to the lightning and goes back to the temporary, entirely temporary nature of that. But he claims that it disappeared and was not found thereafter. I think this is on 76. Is it on 76 or is it before then? I think all the stuff on the on 74, 75 on the Panta, and it's he's basically just summing up what the guy he's gone over. I think all that is fine. When he relates this in 76, 77 to how to put it, one of the ways in which the being of beings appeared to Greek thought, I think that he is fair on all that. He says, such an event prepared itself when O Logos became the guiding word for Heraclitus thinking, because it became the name, or a name, I would gloss, for the being of beings. I think that that's fair. When he claims that this is a brief glimpse that disappeared, I don't think he's proven it disappeared. Right? I think the glimpse is not that brief. That's what I'm going to attempt to maintain, but through the rest of the book. Okay, and I can attach that to lots of other things which I think read Heraclitus or these thoughts, at least this philosophically, if I can put it that way, without the destiny business, with the wisdom business. But okay, what are the stakes here? The stakes here are, how much did Heraclitus see, and is how much Heraclitus saw compatible with Heidegger's overall history of Western metaphysics view that there were only a few intonations in the PreSocratics and they were rapidly lost and no one went anywhere with them until I came back and wrote Being in Time, right? Did nothing happen to being? We might even all be able to agree that nothing is happening to being after Nietzschean metaphysics, but was nothing happening to being from the time of the PreSocratics until, say, the time of Scotus Erigena or the time of Dionysius the Areopagite? I deny it. Okay, so cards on the table, right? So I want to just sort of let you know where I'm going with some of these things. I want to give everyone a chance now, since you've heard my take on much of this, to ask me particular questions. I went through all the individual language terms, Joe. I don't know if that was sufficient detail for you on it. I know, Jim, you mentioned that you had a lot of questions about things. I want to turn the floor open to you guys to ask me your questions, or also react to anything I've said so far and tell me I'm full of it or anything like that. Nobody else.
Well, for me, I think most of the questions I asked as we went through, the only one left that hasn't even attempted to be addressed is this on page 77, and the same exact quote you just gave. Nothing less than this, the Greeks would have thought the essence of language and the essence of being indeed as this for itself is the name of being of beings. My question was, is this the scene of the crime that led Heidegger to write Being in Time? And yes, it rhymes. That's good. Come on.
The answer is no. It's a fair question, and I'm glad that it rhymes. But the answer is no. This is not the scene of the crime that led him to write Being in Time. The thing that led him to write Being in Time was much more that he found that the philosophy of the late 19th century couldn't directly and clearly answer his questions about the meaning of being, and he thought that weird.
the other thing I would say definitely led to writing Being in Time was the ways in which he thought Husserl had underrated the importance of the practical and the importance of the non-purely, if I can put it this way, perceptual, epistemological aspects of the life world. Right? There was a hole in Husserlian phenomenology that it was too focused on the problems of positivist epistemology instead of what phenomenology actually tells us about the structure of the life world. So those two, to me, are the main motivators of the actual sort of Heideggerian project that way at the beginning. Now, he also discusses lots of other things along the way about its relation to all this other stuff, and he goes further than that. But if you're talking about inciting incidents, right, it's that there's more going on.
Aristotle would be proud, right?
There's more going on in phenomenology than is dreamt of at Edmund Husserl in neurophilosophy. That's one. And why can't any of these supposedly perfectly strict about the meaning of words, logic chopping positivists tell me what the hell being means, right? So the fact, and those two are connected in that there are things missing from both that both point towards something like being. But so I don't think that I don't think he was motivated to any of that activity by things he saw or didn't see in the PreSocratics, and particularly the understanding of logos as a name for the being of beings. There's some of his later works where he talks about problems of logic, where he has the word logos as the history of the word logos and the history of the idea of logos and how it degenerated from a word for the being of beings in Heraclitus into a word for logic chopping by positivists and syntax only. He's concerned with that trajectory, so to speak, and some of the stuff we saw in these different definitions of truth was kind of about that. The being of beings is not a computer program for syntax. Let's put it that way. So that thought might be related to the point that's being made here, but and that might have been part of his initial motivations, but that's as close as I would get them. Does that help?
Yes, and I have one little follow-up question on that. Then would this be his attempt, like that he, I guess, failed at to make some of his claims of promise in Being in Time never came to fruition in Being in Time? Is this another one of his attempts to do that, but still doesn't quite make?
So I think there's plenty of things that he didn't finish in Being in Time that he put off in other books, but he got to a lot of them either by basic problems or the Kant books and so forth. I think most of that got fleshed out one way or another to the extent that he still believed in them, but he also just made other discoveries that took in other directions. I think by this point, we're later in all that, and that's not what's driving it anymore. The question here is more like, how much is there in the history of Western metaphysics that is well worth savings, and how much is it something that has to be started over? That's the primary motivation I think he has at this time, is how much is a new beginning with his own ideas necessary because of failures in the metaphysical tradition before him. And the reason that that matters for this book is this is a place where people are doing metaphysics in a way that he has the highest opinion of. That some of the stuff you find in Heraclitus is closest to some of his own thoughts. So it's a point where he should have the most appreciation and respect for the tradition. And does he, right? He does a lot. I mean, we saw some of that also in some of the stuff on Plato in the cave, as opposed to his supposedly erroneous doctrine of truth. But the live issue here is Western metaphysics something which has missed the point from the beginning in a way that has closed down access to the phenomena of transcendence that has to be reopened in an entirely different vein? Or is that access to the extent that it is something that can be renewed, something that should be renewed or has to be renewed by recapitulating the ground of which these people have already been, right? Are people like Heraclitus and Parmenides masters here who must be learned from, or are they erring students who must be learned from only in the sense of what not to do? Dan?
You know, based on what I told you that I'm reading, it seems to me that being in time it's a response to Kant mainly, and it's a take on that and trying to go the same answer but in a more radical way. And it's also like the fact that the continuation of being in time was Kant book and another like direct responses to Kant. And of course, Husserl goes back to Kant and all the logical positivists and the rest. But to me now, it seems like I was struck by that revelation these days that it's kind of a retake on what Kant did. But,
so I'm going to I mean, I know you might have another point, but partly agree. But I think part of that is that the dominant philosophy before him at the time, I mean, in his milieu in Germany, was a kind of neo-Kantianism that where if you spoke to them in terms of the conditions for the possibilities of experience, they knew exactly what you're talking about, and it was familiar ground, and you could talk with them and they would take you seriously, and there was a common language for it. And it, for the places where he's going, you almost had to start there, right? Leaving aside whether or not Kant is the only thing he's reacting to, how are you going to make an impression on a philosophical tradition of your day that is steeped in neo-Kantianism if you decide that the thing you wanted to do instead was just talk to them about how to read Heraclitus? Would any of them have taken you seriously if you told them, let's start with Heraclitus, and maybe Heraclitus, some scholastics, no, I mean. But if you tell them that we're going to, approach the problem of the meaning of being in a Kantian way by understanding conditions of possibilities of the structures of experience, you're already in the room, right? They're already paying attention. And if you make arguments that land, if you can do the kind of phenomenology that Husserl did, that with that degree of care, so the evidence is there before people, they have to pay attention, right? It's something they have to take seriously. So I think that there's a significant part of the starting point that is that it's just he has to be plugged into a living tradition in order to make an impression on people. Does that mean that Kant and reactions to Kant are also central to his whole project? Maybe, but I think part of that is accidental. Part of that is a way in which Heidegger is a product of his time and place. I think he gets beyond that. By the time the stuff he's writing in the mid-30s, I think he can be carrying on conversation with the Nietzsche's and Plato's of the world, and not just with the Cassiers and Herman Cohen's of the world, right? But in the 20s, first to get heard, he had to speak in a language that the people around him would understand. Does that make sense? Okay, fair point though. So first, other reactions to anything I've laid out before, and then particular questions.
And so just one thing with what you were just saying about being in time and where was this then? And I think it was already there. He doesn't talk about Heraclitus, but on page 55, the section, the concept of the logos, he brings in what you were saying about logos becomes logical and about assertion. And so in being in time, he's already pushing against that and saying we have to look at the original meaning of logos.
Yes, but I don't think when he's thinking the original meaning of logos there, he's thinking particularly of it as, its role in Heraclitus's philosophy, right? He is thinking about its meaning to the Greeks. He's thinking about its larger meaning. Agreed. He already knows about those trajectory things. He already has that pushing against that place where logical positivism is coming out, no question. So yeah, that's a fair point. He certainly already has that awareness. That doesn't come later. That's also part of just his whole reaction to Husserl, right? He thinks Husserl is too indebted to those people, if I can put it that way, to that school he's coming out of.
All right, I want to mention a few other resources I can recommend for things for next time for people that are interested. We already talked about how we're going to have some pages from this book. Someone put in the chat what the pages are in the new edition, the new translation as well. But we'll try to get that distributed in the sense of like a link underneath the next one. Obviously, we're just reading the Parmenides chapter for the next time in this. A few other things, and this one might be more relevant for the fourth one, but I think I already mentioned this one. I know Craig has this book. This is Eva Braun on the Logos of Heraclitus. I think it's a very good book. She's a very good writer on Heraclitus in general, if you want to know more about that. He's not honestly that good in this. This is Nietzsche's little book on philosophy and tragic age of the Greeks. I think his essay on Heraclitus in here is better than most of them. Some are pretty shallow, honestly. This is a young Nietzsche, but as a professor, but might be of some interest. The other one I kind of like a little bit of is there's a few things there's a little book by Kolakowski on 23 questions of great philosophers. And it has short things about Parmenides, Heraclitus, and a couple on Plato, but the Heraclitus and Parmenides ones might be of interest to people if you want to look that up. Anyway, it's a fun little book. The nature of this book is just Heraclitus considers this philosopher what he's most known for, and he comes up with some question that he thinks is a relevant one to ask of that philosopher. That philosopher is problematic without answering it. He's just giving you the question, right? He'll lay out enough of the question to raise the question into your mind, but he's just trying to get you to think about it. So it's not didactic. It's not answers to these things. It's just here's a question to think about each of these 23 thinkers or 23 different questions. Anyway, those are just other things I can recommend to people if they want to read a little more widely.
Well, what's the title of the Kolakowski again?
Sorry, it's called Why Is There Something Rather Than Nothing, which is, of course, the subject matter of the Introduction to Metaphysics book. That's the question he asks here. It's a formulation made famous by Leibniz, but why are there essence rather than nothing? Why is there something rather than nothing? 23 questions from great philosophers by Leslie Kolakowski.
Didn't we do that book a while back?
We did. It was like 4 years ago, 5 years ago. It was quite a while.
Long ways ago. Yeah, been a while.
Yes, we did. I think we also did the Eva Braun book, but only one section on it. And that one was at Paradise Bakery outside in the summer, if I recall correctly. Or at least not the summer. It was nice enough to be outside. That probably means it was spring or fall.
Yeah. I think the Kolakowski, it seems to me we were doing it at the new bookstore on Camelback.
That's right. Kind
of coming back to me.
Yep.
But one other note that I discovered as I was trying to find the pages in the new edition of the Introduction to Metaphysics, about 20 pages later, at least in this volume, is a paragraph that I'll have to go back and read a little bit more thoroughly. That Heidegger literally says, this is a place to return briefly to the question of the Christian concept of logos, particularly that of the New Testament. So there is a section where Heidegger
he does.
goes into that.
He's quite down on the Christians on this. He talks about logos in John. I don't think, you're right. He talks about it. I don't think it's a very good discussion.
He kind of dismisses it fairly quickly, and he says this isn't at all what Heraclitus was talking about.
Yes, I recall there was another person I saw recently, not Heidegger, but someone else was trying to make the point that of course logos in John can't have anything to do with the Stoics because it's coming from this stuff from the wisdom literature, as though nothing in the wisdom literature could have anything to do with Stoicism.
But then what kind of isn't he supposed to understand their thoughts as they think them and not dismiss them because they're not his?
Honored in the breach, as they say. The reality, I think the reality is that many of these things were much more flowing into each other, syncretic and mutually influencing than later siloed thinkers or academics especially suppose, right? And you should expect that every cross-fertilization that you can imagine actually occurred.
And that's much more likely to be true than that any particular reason why A couldn't have influenced B, or A, clearly was a separate tradition from B. We'll keep them in little separated boxes. Those stories are almost never true. So someone tell, I can list 10 people that are belie this statement. All right. I think this is fine. I think we're good for this session. In terms of the next session, let's finalize the time as March the 12th. Any issues? March the 12th, 4 weeks from now. All right, and the supplemental reading, I'll work with Pete in getting that out to people in an electronic form, readable form, and then, but the main thing is just the actual essay on Parmenides from this one. Parmenides will be fun. Parmenides often thought as an opposite of Heraclitus, but he's not really an opposite of Heraclitus, as we saw from some of the things we've learned about Heraclitus this time. But he is the philosopher of being and the one, put it that way, as opposed to change, becoming, appearance, opinion, the many. He's a paradigm rationalist, but that doesn't mean that there isn't aspects of his philosophy that are as much in the vein of the intuitive mystic as what we saw in Heraclitus. They most definitely are. But yeah, we'll get into all the things about Parmenides next time. The do I want to forecast? I don't think I want to foreshadow too much about the content of it, but we're going to learn why being and thinking are the same, for one thing. That's the and by the way, the one thing I want to make sure to point out to you, I think Heidegger will find out in this too, but when you hear that being and thinking are the same, don't think that the same is an afterthought and it's just occurring as an equal sign between two things. The same is a full-fledged third in this relationship. The same is a term of art in that statement, just as much as being is, or what gets loosely translated as thinking is. Okay, so pay attention to what the same means is what I'm trying to tell you. All right.
By the way, Pete, I did go back and look at those 2-letter abbreviations in that text, and they're German abbreviation. They're for the German.
Yes.
Which I did find was actually Introduction to Metaphysics for one of them, and Sein und Zeit, Being and Time. But the VA turns out to be Essays and Lectures, which was only done in German. So those are all scattered everywhere else. So it's partially helpful.
But you can use Pete's website to find out exactly which things those are going to be in, though, and many of them are translated and just somewhere else.
And so the one we're doing today is from Lectures and Essays.
Yeah,
So
it's just the English version doesn't have the specific book and Essays and Lectures. It's scattered into many books.
yes.
Yeah, found that.
Yes.
But now that helps kind of close it out for me.
Yeah, and on my website, I have sort of like the English version of Lectures and Essays. So you get the table of contents from the German book, and then it's linked to the translations in all their different
I found that.
places.
Yeah, thanks.
Very useful resource. All right. Any last comments from anyone? Not, I'll stop recording.